Today we'll talk about the process state diagram, basically the lifetime of a process from birth all the way through death. And so when you start a process, as you know, it gets admitted into the system through a fork call. In fact, all processes begin with a fork in the Unix system. So there's a parent and there's a child. The child gets created with a fork. And so it gets moved to the run state. Now it's not really doing anything at this point in time. It's just ready to run. But it doesn't have a CPU. It's been loaded into memory. At some point, the scheduler will say, okay, I got some free CPU cycles. Let's go ahead and run this process. And so it'll move from the ready state to running. And it will run for a while, and one of three things will happen. Either an I/O will occur, the scheduler will say you've had enough time, I'm going to give the CPU to somebody else, or the process will finish. Let's assume that it's run for a full time quantum. A time quantum is the amount of time that a processor gives a process before it stops. The scheduler will come in and say, okay, you've had enough time, somebody else deserves the CPU at this point in time, and a context switch will occur. And so the process will move back to the ready state. So here we have a interrupt from the operating system to move the process from the running state back to the ready state. And here we have the scheduler scheduling the process. Now my process is in the running state, in the ready state, and at a certain time, the scheduler will again move it to the running state. It will run for a while, and let's say this time an I/O occurs. Maybe the process needs a disk. Maybe the process needs the network. In which case, it will move to the block state or waiting state. Here I have an I/O or maybe an event wait. Generally, I'm waiting for some external device to finish its work. The network needs to come back. Maybe the keypad needs to come back. Possibly the disk needs to come back. But at a certain point in time, that I/O will complete, an interrupt will happen, and the I/O will finish, I/O completion, and the process will move back to the ready state. It will stay in the ready state for a while until the scheduler decides to schedule it again. At this point, I'm back in the running state. Let's say the process now completes. It will move to the terminated state through an exit call. And in Unix, all processes must call exit when they leave. If you write a C++ application and you don't put exit at the bottom, that's fine. The compiler will do it for you, and an exit will happen. Now, the process, when it exits, moves to what's called the zombie state. And the zombie state is basically a process that has terminated or has been killed, and it stays zombie until the parent reaps the data from the child process through the wait command. You may recall that the parent itself can wait until the child exits. Once the parent has reaps the data from the child, we move from the zombie to completely off the system, and all data from the child is gone. If the parent happened to exit before the child exited, or if the parent doesn't call the wait command, then the child becomes an orphan. And it stays in the orphan state until process number 1 comes and reaps that data back from the child, in which case it moves out of the orphan state, again, to completely out of the system. So this is the process state diagram. You'll notice that the process spends most of its time in this middle part, ready, run, or blocked. In fact, there's two types of processes. I'll put it here, CPU bound and I/O bound. A process which is CPU bound spends most of its running time utilizing the CPU. A process which is I/O bound spends most of its running time waiting for either the disk or for the network. The majority of processes, greater than 90%, are I/O bound. And so they get the CPU for a very small amount of time, then they wait for a very long amount of time, move back to the ready state, and then to the run state. Moving from the run state to the ready state by either of these requires a context switch. And a context switch, basically what happens is the state of the thread that's running, or the process that's running, set to the side. The scheduler runs, chooses the next process to run, brings its state into the operating system in the memory, and runs that CPU. So that's the process state diagram. Thank you very much.